Hello, my name is Karen Lovan. This is my presentation for OL 680, Global Moral Responsibility on Guatemala. The moral issues I will be addressing are child labor and safety in travel, and how it impacts a general manager of a Clarion Hotel's financial decisions. Guatemala faces many moral issues. However, today I will be discussing the moral issue of child labor and how using child labor violates the moral issue of non-injury. Non-injury states that we are not to harm others physically or psychologically. We are to avoid harming their health or security. The moral issue is how would an organizational leader handle the purchase of needed products they are aware are produced by child labor. The next issue I will be addressing is how an organizational leader faces the balance of keeping tourists safe in a secured location while staying within the monetary expectations of their stakeholders. I will discuss this within the context of a hotel general manager of a Clarion hotel line and how he would handle these issues. A few relevant facts about why I chose Guatemala. I chose Guatemala due to the news we have heard over the last year of stories of Guatemalan refugees at the United States and Mexican border. I wanted to know what life was like for the people of Guatemala and the moral issues organizational leaders would encounter while doing business in the country. Guatemala is a Central American country with a population of more than 16 million people, and a majority live in poverty. According to the U.S. Department of State, the United States is Guatemala's most important economic partner. The government of Guatemala continues to enhance competitiveness, promote investment opportunities, and work on legislation reforms to support economic growth. More than 200 U.S. and other foreign firms have active investments in Guatemala. Dealing with child labor. According to the U.S. Department of Labor, children in Guatemala are engaged in some of the worst forms of child labor. The children perform dangerous tasks in agriculture as well as tasks related to construction. To give an example, on a small scale, to order Guatemalan coffee in the U.S. for a 5-pound bag, it would cost you just over $40. To order it in-country, the cost would be $44. This is the cost without paying for shipping or import fees. The general manager would save the company money by purchasing in-country. According to Harvard Business Review, moreover, in an economy where 70% to 80% of market value comes from hard-to-assess intangible assets such as brand equity, intellectual capital, and goodwill, organizations are especially vulnerable to anything that damages reputations. The daily purchasing of goods, a general manager must assess the expense that could cost to purchase consumable goods. In purchases of local goods, it saves on the expense of distant shipping and processing. However, the issue of child labor brings about a moral dilemma. By using the steps of the moral decision-making process, we can decide what is the best direction to take. Utilizing the moral decision-making process. Considering our stakeholders and stakeholder interest. In steps 3 and 4 of the moral decision-making process, we consider the stakeholders, who they are, and who will be affected by the general manager's decision of purchasing goods in Guatemala or out of country. The first set of stakeholders will be the investors. Decisions made at the property level can detriment a company's when making decisions on moral issues like child labor. This can and does impact revenue. The next affected party will be the general manager and on-site managers. These individuals will be held accountable for all decisions. It is in the best interest of these individuals, as they will have to answer for decisions as they make them and how it impacts the revenue. Lastly, the staff working at the property. If the wrong decision is made and the hotel closes, they will be out of jobs. Alternative actions. The moral principle of non-injury, which is the duty not to harm others physically or psychologically, to avoid harming their health, security, intelligence, character, or happiness. There are 6.3% of children ages 7 to 14 working in child labor today in Guatemala. While this number is disturbing to the U.S. and other more affluent countries, Guatemala's children, in fact, help support their families. Families cannot afford to live without income their children bring in. The alternative action to buying outside of Guatemala would be to purchase goods from local farmers who are following the company's ethical standards that only employ children who are at the hiring age within the home country's labor laws. The pros and cons. The first con is costing the company more money by ordering outside of Guatemala. The pro to this is securing the company's reputation by not purchasing goods in Guatemala. The country does not have an adverse reaction from its consumers. The second con is by purchasing a product like coffee in the country and knowing that it is farmed by child labor can ruin the company's reputation beyond the borders of Guatemala. Child labor is perceived as violating the principle of non-injury. Children are in danger of physical harm. In the non-injury moral principle, it states, not to harm someone physically or psychologically, to avoid harming their health, security, intelligence, character, or happiness. The pro and the second con is saving the company money. To restate the dilemma, does the general manager buy product in Guatemala or purchase a product in another country to save on expenses of the required goods, knowing that by purchasing goods in Guatemala, the company could be perceived as condoning child labor? Applying the decision-making process. Restating the dilemma. To restate the moral dilemma, does the general manager buy product in Guatemala and risk damage to the company's reputation, or save the company money and have the goods imported? What is the expense to the company by ordering outside of Guatemala? By purchasing product in Guatemala, consumers perceive that the hotel condones child labor, which could damage the company's reputation. Conflicting principles. Non-injury versus benefits. In this step, the general manager must consider the intangible monetary worth of the company's value system. Is saving money enough of a reason to disregard the principle of non-injury? Consumers are educated and want to know that the companies they support are abreast of the world's issues like child labor. A conflicting moral issue would be benefits. By purchasing in-country goods, this would benefit the local families by increasing sales for the local farmers and increasing revenue that would allow for pay increases. This would create a condition that would make the lives of Guatemalans better. Step 9. Put it all together and decide on the preferable action. In this step, the GM should revisit the principle of non-injury. Is she open to doing business with a company that allows children to work in dangerous situations just to save on the monetary bottom line? As a general manager, I would purchase goods outside of Guatemala. In reinstating the Harvard Business Review, moreover, in an economy where 70 to 80% of market value comes from hard to assess intangible assets such as brand equity, intellectual capital, and goodwill, organizations are especially vulnerable to anything that damages their reputations. There is a cost to the company's reputation that is not measurable. Consumers educate themselves and they want to do business with companies they feel uphold the same moral standards. The savings in country are not as important as the cost of beyond the borders of Guatemala. Exploring the second moral issue. The second moral issue and moral dilemma the general manager of the Clarion Hotel will face is how to control expenses while keeping the guest and assets safe. The moral issues that will conflict are harm prevention and justice, which is the duty to allow one to act in such a way that distributes benefits and burdens. Harm prevention must override justice, as the general manager is responsible for protecting the company and possibly facing litigation by allowing tourists to take risk while they are at the hotel. Things to know about Guatemalan tourism, the relevant facts. The process of securing tourists to sustain tourism is defined as securitization. Tourism has become economically, politically, socially, culturally, and personally valuable. The value of tourism has risen, and it is argued that it is under threat, and steps are being taken to secure it. This is where the term tourist securitization comes from. In this, a general manager must practice the moral principles of harm prevention. It is the duty of the GM to protect the guest from being injured by outside influences while staying and working at the hotel. Guatemala is considered a risky travel location. However, tourists have been traveling to the country since the 1930s. Guatemala experiences violence every day and is considered one of the world's most violent countries. Due to the violence, the local sectors are constructing sanitization and fortified tourist bubbles, which within these bubbles, they are protected from harm, such as an all-inclusive resort. Security measures including plainclothes security and police departments that are listed as National Civil Police, Municipal Tourist Police, and the Transit Police, all of which are patrolled within these areas. The warnings from the U.S. State Department go. Tourist groups are advised to request security escorts. Security escorts for tourist groups are available from the Guatemalan Tourism Institute. Who has a stake? Stakeholders and stakeholder interest. The first set of stakeholders are the investors. If the property experiences high local crime, the property will lose revenue, creating a situation where closure would mean lost financial investment. The second set of stakeholders are the staff at the hotel. If the property does not prosper, it will be at risk of closing. The final stakeholder is the local area. Tourism is a major revenue generating industry, and without it, there will be a loss of revenue for the local merchants. Alternative actions. The alternative action to securing the hotel property would be to assist guests with securing a security detail through the Guatemalan government. This would spare the expense of paying to secure the property and creating the bubble. The issue with this action is that it states on the U.S. State Department website that these security details are not always available. The pros and cons. The con in securing the property and building a sanitized tourist location is that it gives the tourist the feeling that the resort is not safe and they may not visit out of fear. The pro to this is that the GM can show a good faith effort that she has taken measures to keep the traveling public safe. The additional con is that the expense that it would burden the property with while trying to meet the expectation of keeping the budget expenses in line. The pro to this is that creating a bubble, it allows tourists to feel secure and make their own decision as to how they would like to experience the country. Applicable and conflicting principles. Harm prevention versus justice. The applicable principle is harm prevention principle. The harm prevention duty states that it is the duty of a person to prevent harm to others from causes other than him or herself. The GM is responsible for keeping the guests safe and protecting them, thereby protecting the company from litigation. The conflicting principle is justice, sharing the benefits and the burdens with the guest and making them, in part, responsible for their own safety. The benefit of the guest is being able to explore beyond the realm of the safe zone of the hotel and putting the burden on them to be responsible for their own safety. Preferable action. The preferable action would be that the general manager chooses to protect the guest and provide the safety bubble for the tourist to feel safe. This will protect the company and have the added protection for the guest and reduce the possibility of litigation. The general manager should choose the principle of harm prevention and protect the guests from injury that takes place by others, not by themselves. Thank you for joining me in this presentation. My name is Karen Lovan. This has been my presentation for organizational leadership. Should you have further interest in research, these are the references.